I have to preface this review by saying I'm a Danny Boyle nut, for sure. Even if his films aren't home runs, I find that they always contain within them some incredibly daring and valuable materials. He may build you a house, and it might look like a normal, functional house, but then you see that it has a solid gold door knocker. That's unique, not integral to the function of the house, but it's cool nonetheless. Then you walk inside and you see that it has one of those automatic robot toilets, and okay, that separates it from your average house. And slowly you start to notice these small technical flourishes that make this house just a notch above what makes a regular house so plain. Now, some of his films are like Pee Wee Herman's house, all jittery and playful and colorful and in your face. Think Trainspotting, The Beach, 127 Hours, Slumdog Millionaire. Others are a bit more subdued. Think Steve Jobs, Shallow Grave, Yesterday, or even Sunshine. You get the idea. Now, 28 Days Later is unique in his catalog because while it has his jittery ADHD energy, it also paces itself and looks like it was shot through a glass of chocolate milk. If that movie were a house, it might be the house that Pennywise lives inside of. It looks dilapidated on the outside, but inside it harbors the soul of a demon clown. I fear that my house metaphor might be crumbling before my very eyes. Of course, that was by design. Shooting with a DV camera allowed for a griminess and grittiness that would have been lost had it been filmed traditionally. So yes, it's an ugly film, but one that held within it a total reimagining of the zombie genre, and therefore you could walk in and see robot toilets galore. You were literally looking into the future. Because after that film, zombies were in vogue, and they were a lot scarier than your slow-ass Romero zombies. But even within this dank, blurry, frenetic DV footage, you had all the hallmarks that Boyle would only perfect as he went along. Stylized imagery, unpredictable tone shifting, emotional resonance, eclectic use of music, surreal or hyper-real sequences, and use of multiple formal techniques within a single film, often within a single scene. He's never a boring filmmaker, not as bombarding as someone like Baz Luhrmann, but certainly no Tarkovsky. And so after almost 2 decades in development hell, we finally have 28 years later, the third in the series after Days and Weeks. Weeks being the only one so far not directed by Danny Boyle, though a lot of the visual language could be seen in that one as well. I have a lot to say about 28 years later, so hang in there. This might be a longer one than usual, but first, what is this film about? Well, 28 years later follows the harrowing journey of a young boy named Spike, who lives with his family in a tightly knit survivor community on an island, a safe haven separated from the mainland by a treacherous tidal causeway. Spike's father, Jamie, is a bold but reckless scavenger who pushes the limits of their safety, while his mother, Isla, struggles with a mysterious illness causing memory loss and confusion. As Spike begins to question his father's choices and their community's isolation, he takes a bold step to find answers and hope for his mother's condition. Venturing to the infected mainland, Spike discovers new dangers, including a terrifying evolution of the infected. The story weaves through Spike's growing disillusionment, his bond with his mother, and his desperate search for a cure, all while grappling with the relentless threat of the rage virus. Now, let's get right to the meat and potatoes of this film. I spent a good amount of time at the beginning of this video talking about Danny Boyle as a filmmaker and talking about the first film, because I found myself throughout my viewing experience of this movie wondering if everyone in the theater had any former relationship to this world, to the previous films in the series, to Boyle himself, because from the get-go, if you don't, you might find yourself scratching your head at some of the choices. Mainly that the movie looks kinda shitty when projected up on a big screen. There are aberrations in almost every frame, weird focusing shifts. Sometimes it looks like the lens is smeared with Vaseline, and the montage-y editing style might also throw you off. But again, if you've been around the block a few times, this is business as usual. The shittiness for you will be a feature, not a bug. And that was something refreshing to me. The feeling of being back in a universe, one that looks a lot like ours, unlike superhero universes, but still a continuous cinematic story. But like the other additions in the saga, we're following completely new characters, Spike and his father Jamie and his mother Isla. Okay, so right off the bat, I have to mention my main gripe with this film and films that make similar decisions. I'm just gonna be blunt. I can't stand that our main character is a child. I just can't. You put the entire weight of the film on the shoulders of a child and hope for the best, and I would say that 8 times out of 10, they just aren't experienced enough to carry it strongly, and unfortunately, I think that's the case here. It's extra frustrating in this case because the previous film, 28 Weeks Later, is founded upon the whole plot happening because of 2 dumb kids making dumb kid decisions. The tension comes from their idiocy, and they don't even get any comeuppance for it, unless you count, of course, them having to shoot their infected father and all the people that die because of their actions. But here, we're sort of introduced to the same story. A wildly unqualified child in a quarantine zone, a safe community, just has to go outside the bounds of the quarantine in search of something for his mother. And in the process, he maybe gets in way over his head and a few well-meaning people get killed because of it. That aspect of the film was tough for me to grapple with, but ultimately, I was pulled back in by the set pieces and the general unpredictability of what was coming next. There's a quote from LA Times film critic and podcaster Amy Nicholson that I want to just read because I think she hit the nail on the head here. She says, "From scene to scene, it lurches like the brain doesn't know what the body is doing. Garland and Boyle don't want the audience to know either, at least not yet." There is certainly a lot of setup in this film that can leave it feeling incomplete and oddly paced, which I guess means I should mention that this is the first in a new planned trilogy of films in the 28 Days series. The next film in the series has allegedly already been shot and might be coming as early as next year, directed by Nia DaCosta. And just touching on the things that it's setting up, for instance, we spend the first 30 minutes or so with Spike and Jamie, his father, as Jamie takes Spike to the mainland for the first time to get his first infected kill, a rite of passage for young people in this community. This sets us up for some incredibly chilling chase sequences, some new rules about the evolution of the infected, mainly the concept of alphas, which are like zombies on steroids, but like not the kind of steroids that make your, shrink, if you know what I mean. This entire sequence was excellent, in my opinion. The perfect level of suspense, genuine thrills, mystery, and intrigue. But then, in an interesting formal decision, Boyle and Alex Garland decide to follow Spike as he returns to the mainland with his ailing mother in search of a man who may or may not be a doctor and may or may not be insane. And in a lot of films of this nature, we'd follow the boy, cut back to the father as he discovers that his son is missing. Maybe he goes after him, and we get a classic A story and a B story that will converge in the end. You've seen it a million times. But this time around, we stick with Spike the whole way through, never going back to Jamie on the island until the final minutes of the film. This was pretty jarring, and on the one hand, it sets us up for this unpredictability aspect that it captures so well, but on the other hand, I did feel the absence of Aaron Taylor Johnson, especially when the back half of this movie is Spike playing against his mother, played wonderfully by Jodie Comer, and the chemistry that comes off a bit unbalanced. Even if the story at hand was a touching one, a child trying desperately to go beyond the ends of his own earth to find a solution to her illness, it's really enough to get you teary-eyed. I promise not to harp on the performance of Alfie Williams too much, but the back half of the film relies on him to do a lot, and I think I didn't fully buy a majority of what he was doing. But I want to get some more general thoughts out of the way before I spoil this thing completely, so I'll say this for anyone who hasn't seen it. We go to zombie films for various reasons: the never-ending suspense, the bloody kills, the occasional updating of the rules, and this film has all of that and then some. In particular, a nearly constant state of, where is this going? All the way up to the final seconds of this film where we are given an ending that, let me just say, I could feel all of the eyebrows in the room raised during the final 2 minutes of this film. And I find myself having a hard time talking about this film, not just because I'm having difficulty not spoiling it, but also because there's a sense of incompleteness to it, which on the one hand makes sense, but on the other, as far as a standalone film goes, it leaves some things to be desired. The Boyleisms are on display. The use of the iPhone is an obvious choice to film this installment of the franchise. And again, yes, it looks kind of shitty and rugged, but that shittiness is a feature in my eyes. And while the concept of introducing a coming-of-age tale within the 28 Days Later universe is intriguing, I could admit that on its face, I just found my body and mind involuntarily trying to reject it. In the horror genre, we already have to concede a lot of our expectations when it comes to our characters' intelligence and their decision-making, and When you throw a child into the protagonist chair, any ounce of hope you had for smart decision making automatically just kind of gets tossed out with the bathwater. And the last act of this film feels like a whimper in comparison to the ending sequences of the previous outings. I mean, the siege of the military-occupied castle at the end of the first one is an iconic set piece, and this one aims for a more somber, reflective tone, one that you might find in other non-zombie coming-of-age films. So, on the one hand, I admire it, and I understand that what we're seeing is essentially Act 1 of, hopefully, a fleshed-out design. But on the other hand, I was feeling perfectly whelmed. I got what I came for and the promise of more to come later, and in addition to that, we're offered a classic message of the genre, whether it be zombie-specific or horror in general. That message being that the things that make us feel human and powerful, like love, family, loyalty, and empathy, are also sometimes our downfall. So with that, I do want to dip into spoilers for this film, so don't watch any further if you haven't seen 28 Years Later. Okay, now with all of them gone, here's a list of specific things that I want to touch on. 1, series continuity, the iPhone technology question. 2, the baby. 3, Dr. Kelson and the death of Isla. 4, Jack O'Connell as Jimmy. Okay, starting with number 1, maybe I missed something. Maybe I'm meant to be confused, but the first film depicts the infection starting in 2003. This film is 28 years later, so 2031. The film goes on to imply that this infection has been contained enough so that life is going on as normal elsewhere on the planet. Because presumably, if it wasn't, we wouldn't have ever had the iPhone. At one point, Isla and Spike run into Eric, a Swedish naval soldier, who shows Spike a photo on his iPhone of his girlfriend back home. And I was scratching my head because I was like, I don't remember them mentioning the vast portions of the Earth were not impacted by the virus. And I must have had it in my head that what we were seeing was a sort of World War Z scenario where the virus had overrun the world. But no, while the island that Spike is from has rewound a millennium, business as usual has occurred elsewhere. Even in the conversation beforehand, Eric tells a story about his friend who was a delivery driver for things that people would order online. Once again, I was like, wait, you can't be more than 28 years old yourself. How could you possibly know about delivery drivers and the internet? And that was when it dawned on me what was actually happening. Again, let me know in the comments if I just missed a crucial piece of information in this film or in 28 Weeks Later. But this was a pretty major blow to my perception of this story going forward, and it leads to some interesting thought experiments for the future of this franchise. Also, just a fun idea, if Steve Jobs was around long enough to make the iPhone and all that, maybe he was beloved enough to have a movie made about him in this universe too, and that movie maybe was directed by Danny Boyle, so maybe Danny Boyle exists in the 28 Days Later series. I'm just saying. Another subtle thing that Eric offers us before he meets his grisly demise is he straight up says the word zombie, and that was refreshing. In fact, kind of serendipitous. Here's a clip from my last video about materialists. The same way that in most zombie movies, the characters in them have never seen a zombie movie, and so they're all like, what's happening? And we're all like, dude, you're in a zombie movie. Those are clearly zombies. So it's pretty interesting that, again, in this universe, there are people out there that are beyond unaffected by what's happening in Britain. All right, anyway, let's get to number 2. We see in pretty solid detail a pregnant, infected woman give birth to a non-infected baby girl. Now, it's unclear if that woman was already pregnant when she became infected or, well, another kind of huge bombshell to this universe. Alex Garland did say in an interview I saw recently that there were going to be a lot of tweaks to what we know about this universe and the zombies that we're used to, and I gotta say that he and Boyle delivered on that front. So once again, this element is adding to the building blocks for what will become this new trilogy that we're getting, and I'm very curious how this will pay off. Perhaps this baby Isla will be a key of sorts. I don't know. Time will tell. And that brings us to number 3. Dr. Kelson, played deliciously by Ralph Fiennes in the third act, is a breath of fresh air in a film that was up to that point getting a little repetitive. He essentially acts as the Colonel Kurtz character that Spike is seeking out the whole film, the man who will hopefully have the cure to his mother's illness and maybe a few nuggets of wisdom. And he Well, he certainly has one of those two things. This section offers us sort of a philosophical angle to contrast the bombarding, primeval danger of the first two-thirds. His mission to remember the dead, to preach that every skull has had a thought, I found to be beautifully poetic in a morbidly macabre sort of way. He honors the dead in his own way, something that we see very little of in this genre, and the reveal that Spike's mother was terminally ill, and that there was no cure, was devastating to watch. It felt a bit like that scene in War of the Worlds where Tom Cruise has to go in that room and kill Tim Robbins while Dakota Fanning waits outside the door. Only in this version, Tim Robbins is the one who walks back out alive, and also it's not like that at all because Ralph Fiennes is not antagonistic. I don't know why I brought that up. But yeah, I found this whole sequence to be super effective. And again, rather than have another large-scale set piece after this, we get essentially a classic Danny Boyle ending montage to some pulsating music and more information thrown our way. Like Spike delivers the baby back to his island. He goes off living in the mainland in search of something even he doesn't understand yet. And then we're introduced to Jack O'Connell. Man, this is what I was talking about when I said the collective eyebrows raised in my theater at the sight of Jack O'Connell donning a tracksuit and long bleached hair and being surrounded by what can only be described as tracksuit ninjas. Yeah, what the fuck? I think Danny Boyle and Alex Garland know what they're doing by now, and they knew that they needed to end this film on something totally left field after the somber note of what is ultimately the climax. And man, they delivered on that front once again. I don't know where the this story is going, but you better believe I want to be there on day one to find out. So I want to wrap this up and reiterate a few things. This film does a lot of things well, but there is a distance that is the nature of being the first in a series, which just creates this feeling of being hungry for more. I hesitate to call it unsatisfied, but more so teased. It does the perfect job of setting up the chess pieces that we'll see moved in the coming two installments. The character of Spike being propped up as the protagonist that we're going to follow for the next two films leaves me a smidge annoyed, but maybe that's something that I need to get over myself. There are enough solid performances, enough tonal shifts, including a banger line from Spike when he says, "Why does she look like that?" about Eric's girlfriend. My theater was eating that scene up. There's also a heart-pounding score by Young Fathers that deserves a proper shout-out, and whoever's idea it was to utilize the Kipling poem Boots in both the marketing material and in the film deserves a huge raise because, my God, does it make you uneasy. That entire sequence in the beginning of Spike and his father entering the mainland, being interspliced with black and white footage of young soldiers marching and clips from 1944's Henry V was menacing and set the tone for the entire film. It's nice to see Boyle and Garland working together and taking a crack at the genre that they both helped to reanimate all of those years ago and see if they could do it again. And yeah, maybe it's too soon to tell, but as of right now, I think that they might be on the pathway to doing just that. Those are my thoughts on 28 Years Later. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments what you thought of this film, what you think of Danny Boyle as a filmmaker. Are you excited for the next installments in this series? Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, hit the bell to be notified when new videos come out on the channel, and I'll see you all next time.